When it comes to the Battle of the Little Bighorn, a name that has echoed through history for nearly a century, there are few who can offer a first-hand account of what transpired that fateful day. One of those men is John Martin, a trumpeter who found himself in the heart of the chaos, carrying messages for none other than General George Armstrong Custer. Born in a simpler time, Martin's words paint a picture of the events leading up to the battle and offer insights into the final moments of the 7th Cavalry, where death and heroism seem to dance hand in hand. On the morning of June 25, 1876, when the 7th Cavalry set off towards what would become their final confrontation with the Sioux, Martin had no idea that he was stepping into the pages of history. As one of the trumpeters assigned to Custer's immediate staff, he knew his role was simple: convey orders with the sharp, unmistakable sound of the trumpet. But that day, as it turned out, would demand more than just musical skill. Martin would soon find himself on a path that led him into the midst of battle, with death and survival hanging in the balance. Before the command split up and marched in different directions, Martin, along with a few other orderlies, was entrusted with an important task: delivering messages. These messages, simple at first glance, would carry the fate of the men under Custer's command. But first, before the march began in earnest, there was a stop at the mouth of Rosebud Creek. This is where Martin remembers hearing about Sitting Bull's camp. Mitch Bouillet, a scout with the expedition, had informed General Terry and his officers of the location of the enemy camp. According to Bouillet, Sitting Bull had once placed a price on his head, 100 ponies for his life. In his warning, Bouillet made it clear that the Sioux would likely kill him if given the chance. Yet, Custer remained resolute, telling Bouillet that if the scout were to die, his entire command would meet the same fate. It's unclear whether Custer truly understood the peril he was walking into, but from Martin's perspective, that moment seemed like a clear omen. Little did they know that death wasn't just a possibility, but an inevitability. As the command pressed on toward the village of the Lakota, Martin described a striking moment, when the 7th Cavalry halted on a high ridge overlooking the valley below. From that vantage point, Custer and his officers took a few moments to survey the land. Through their binoculars, they observed children playing and dogs running through the teepees, a peaceful, almost serene scene. But there was no sign of warriors. Just a few stray ponies grazing in the distance. Despite the calm, something felt off. A quiet murmur among the officers hinted at their suspicions: perhaps the warriors were out hunting buffalo. Custer seemed to agree with this theory, recalling the skinned buffalo carcasses they had encountered along their march on the previous day. But whether it was the smell of danger on the wind or the sense that something was about to unfold, Custer was determined to press on. He gathered his men and addressed them with a speech: "We'll go down, cross the river, and capture the village. The Indians will have to surrender. After we do this, we can return and avoid harming the women and children." His words seemed to ignite a sense of optimism, and the men cheered. Even in the midst of tension, there was a sense of purpose, an understanding that they were about to change the course of history. Yet, there was something more. It's widely known that Custer's orders to his men were often vague or contradictory. And so, at this moment, Martin's mission became clear. He was tasked with delivering a message to Major Benteen, who had been ordered to move his troops up to support Custer's command. The message would be delivered, but Martin's journey would take him further than anyone could imagine. As Martin rode off, the sound of gunfire began to echo from the valley below. Initially, he wasn't sure what he was hearing. Was it Reno's men, already engaged in the fight? Or was it something else, something much worse? Before he could fully make sense of the noise, he encountered none other than Boston Custer, George Armstrong Custer's younger brother, who was riding toward the command. Martin didn't have time for pleasantries. He continued on his path, reaching the crest of the ridge and looking down into the village. What he saw left him breathless. The Lakota warriors were coming out of hiding like a storm, charging the cavalry, waving buffalo hides as they rushed toward the ford. And in that instant, Martin saw Custer's men retreating from the village, pushing toward open ground. It was then that he realized the scale of the battle unfolding before him. The fire was quick and relentless. Indians were firing scattered shots from the bluffs, and before long, Martin's horse was hit. The animal reeled from the injury, blood splattering across Martin's back. When John Martin, Custer's trumpeter, left the line of battle to deliver the message to Major Benteen, he had no idea how crucial that ride would become in the unfolding chaos. The ground was still heavy with the rumble of hooves and the crackle of gunfire as he raced toward Benteen Creek. The sound of battle, though faint, echoed in the distance. The lives of his comrades and the fate of Custer's command were still hanging in the balance. Martin remembers the encounter with Benteen as clear as day. When he arrived, the major wasted no time in asking, "Where is General Custer?" Without hesitation, Martin replied, "About 3 miles from here." The question that followed was sharp and direct, "Is Custer being attacked?" Martin didn't hesitate to confirm it. "Yes, he is being attacked," he said, but beyond that, he held his tongue. He was careful with his words, knowing that panic or speculation would do no one any good. Despite the urgency of the situation, Martin insists he never said anything about the Indians skedaddling. There were no hints of retreat in his report. He told Benteen only what he knew: Custer's men were under assault. After delivering the message, Martin didn't linger. He had his orders, and he was to ride back. But his journey wasn't quite finished yet. He didn't know where Reno was, he didn't see the man, nor did he come across any sign of a fight. The field was clear, eerily quiet in parts. By the time he crossed back over the ridge and met up with Benteen, the chaos of the battle had already begun to unfold at the river. Yet Martin, ever the observer, saw things with a clear mind. When Benteen and his men finally made their way toward Reno's position, it was clear that the command was already in disarray. Martin watched, somewhat detached, as Reno appeared, hatless and disheveled, rushing up to Benteen. His words echoed the anxiety of a man who'd seen far too much. "For God's sake, Benteen, halt your command and wait until I can organize my men." But despite the turmoil, Martin was not consulted for any further guidance. Neither Benteen nor Reno asked him about the direction of Custer's command. No orders came in his direction. He was simply a messenger, and once his message was delivered, his role was done. However, there was an unexpected moment of dark humor during the retreat. Benteen, riding along the hill, took a quick glance at his boot, which had been shot off by a bullet, and muttered with a dry chuckle, "Pretty close call. Try again." A sharp, but rueful comment from a man who had witnessed death too many times to let it rattle him. And then, in the distance, Martin saw something peculiar. There, atop the ridge, he spotted 4 Crow scouts, members of the allied Indian tribes who had been working with Reno. It was a strange sight, to see men of the same blood and culture now part of the conflict against their own people. The days after the battle were no less fraught with tension. Martin remembers the grim search that took place, as detachments combed the country for the dead. It wasn't just the soldiers they were after, either. Every inch of the land was scoured. The search for fallen comrades took them down to the river, and in this search, Sergeant Butler of L Troop was found. Martin remembers the scene vividly. Butler's horse was dead beside him, and he could see that the sergeant, too, had not made it. He didn't think Butler had been carrying any messages. After all, Butler wasn't one of the orderlies that day. But as Martin looked across the field of the dead, one thing stuck with him: the staggering number of men who had fallen. There were far more dead soldiers than horses, something that left an indelible impression on him. It wasn't just the sheer volume of the fallen, but the way they had been left behind, casualties of a battle that had spiraled out of control. Among the dead, one figure stood out, a first sergeant, whose body was surrounded by torn and scattered pieces of paper money. As strange as it sounds, this soldier had about $500 in paper currency strewn all around him, money that had once been held for safekeeping by other men in the unit. Now, it was little more than scattered debris on a bloody battlefield. The stark reality of the scene was that Custer's command had been utterly overwhelmed. The dead horses, the dismembered bodies, the chaos of the battle, it all told the story of a unit caught in the jaws of a much larger force, unprepared for the ferocity of the Lakota and Cheyenne warriors. The battle wasn't just a defeat, it was an annihilation. As Martin moved through the aftermath, he couldn't help but notice the more grisly details. One of the first things that caught his eye was the mutilation of Custer's own men. He remembered vividly that one of Cook's sideburns had been completely scalped, skin and all. A grim reminder of the savagery of the Sioux warriors. It was a detail that aligned with the reports from other survivors, reinforcing the brutality of what had occurred. When it came to Custer himself, Martin didn't mince words. His wounds were severe, as others like Tom O'Neill and Hammond had described in their own accounts. The horror of it was beyond comprehension, not just for Custer, but for everyone involved. Even Tom Custer, George's younger brother, wasn't spared. He, too, had suffered horrific injuries, leaving behind a scene that was unimaginable. One surprising moment came when they found Keogh's body. He had been wearing a gold chain with an Agnus Dei emblem, a Catholic symbol, which somehow hadn't been taken by the warriors. Benteen made sure to secure it, a small gesture of respect for a fallen comrade. But it wasn't just the soldiers who had suffered. Martin saw the dead among the Lakota as well, scattered along the riverbank near the village. There were many bodies, though he never counted them. A pile of them, nonetheless, left a haunting image in his mind of the price that had been paid on both sides of the conflict. And through all the chaos, there was Comanche, the famous warhorse who had ridden with the 7th Cavalry. Somehow, Comanche managed to follow the troops all the way to the boat that would carry the wounded away. He wasn't led, he followed of his own accord, his loyalty unwavering, even after all that had transpired. When they found the horse, the men were certain he would die, he had been wounded in the battle, after all. But he lingered, and for some reason, his survival seemed almost symbolic of the stubborn endurance of the men who had fought and died that day. It wasn't until 2 days later that General Terry and his men arrived on the battlefield, after the smoke had cleared and the bodies had begun to cool. Terry, no stranger to the horrors of war, took Martin to the spot where he had first turned back from Custer's command. Martin described the ground with remarkable precision, pointing out the same landmarks he had seen when he had ridden out to deliver his message. Terry listened quietly, absorbing the details that Martin shared. As the stories of the survivors began to come together, it was clear that Martin had a unique perspective on the events of that day. He had been there, in the thick of it, but he had also been spared. And it was his account, along with those of the other survivors, that would go on to shape the understanding of what had truly happened at the Battle of the Little Bighorn. John Martin's story is one of survival, but it's also one of duty. He wasn't a soldier in the traditional sense. He was a messenger, a trumpeter, doing his job. Yet his role that day, though seemingly small, became one of the key moments in the history of the 7th Cavalry's last stand. His account adds another layer to the complex and tragic events of June 25, 1876, giving us a glimpse into the chaos and confusion that surrounded one of the most famous battles in American history.